Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. This is a video, so I just wanted to let you know. Obviously, you can listen to it on audio, but I just want to let you know that I have been doing a lot of these on video to kind of show you what's going on. Today, I'm going to go over two Excel sheets, two cheat sheets regarding the showcase, how to use it, but also to kind of show you what you can do on your own in terms of research. I think that there's a misconception as to what you should be looking for when it comes to the showcase. And I'm going to show you the ASHP Residency Search Master Spreadsheet, which will help you keep track of programs, letters of recommendation, application requirements. But what it doesn't really do is give you a good idea of what your chances are to match somewhere. And to match somewhere, I feel like you need to focus on two very different things, which are one, the rotations, and two, the residents themselves and their experience. So I'm going to go through this. There is a bit of complexity to it, but I think that ultimately you're going to be able to create an analysis that is very telling as to your chances to match somewhere. So let's first take a look at the ASHP master spreadsheet, and I'll pop that up here. All right, so it's really, really tiny. So I'm going to try to kind of make this a little bit bigger, and we'll go through these each one at a time. But just to know, this is a big spreadsheet, and I'm just looking at the very top. So the idea with this spreadsheet on ASHP, and I put it on my website too, you can just download it, but it starts with the program, the booth number, showcase time, and there's usually 3 showcase times: forecast code, national matching service code, state, and city. Okay. Then we go to the website itself, program contact name, the RPD, though it's kind of like the residents are usually up front and the RPD is in back to answer any questions that the residents can't. Contact title, contact email, and then mid-year contact name. So if somebody different is the person in charge, I guess. Size of the hospital. Obviously, you wouldn't do size of like the community pharmacy. Number of positions, residency start date. And then, so I guess this is just getting a bunch of things that you could get off the internet. Salary, staffing requirement, and then are there specialties in PGY2, and other characteristics, pros and cons. And the first thing I want you to kind of take away is that this was just meant to help you. Okay, so this isn't a be-all, end-all thing. It's just, okay, let's help the students out by giving them a place to start. Okay? And if you could fill this all out, and maybe you have 10, 15 programs, the big thing that you're going to be figuring out is that the showcase times may be the same for a lot of the ones that you really want to go to. And if that's the case, then you're going to want to kind of prioritize them, or even look at the map and say, okay, where are they? But what happens is some of the most popular ones are extremely busy at the beginning. And that also tells you a lot about how many applicants they're going to get. So if you try to get someplace that you really want to go and you find that it's like 10 deep to get there, well, that might be a tough program to get a hold of. But if at the same time you go to another program and there's nobody waiting and you have plenty of time to talk to them, then you also know that, hey, maybe I have a little better chance at this one, not quite as much interest. So the AMCs, for sure, the academic medical centers, are packed. And then that's the best time to actually do something contrarian, which is to look for the places that don't have that kind of attention. And what you're really looking for is an undervalued residency. Maybe they're in a smaller hospital. Maybe they're a little bit out of the way, those types of things. And really, that's where you find the undervalued residencies. And the thing is that there's going to be a lot more residencies each year. We've really grown quite a bit, about 300 spots each year. So you're going to start seeing where this will happen quite a bit more. The next tab in this Excel spreadsheet has the program, the requirements for the letter writer, and then letter writer 1, 2, and 3. You don't want to go into this with 3 letter writers. You want to definitely have a 4 and a 5 if possible, because something might happen with one of the letter writers that it doesn't work out. Yes, it's ideal to have your 3 clinical, if that's what the site requires, letter writers as the top 3, but you don't have to use the same letter writers for each residency. You can change it up, and if you're doing the split, and it's really tough to pull this off, but if you're applying to ambulatory care and acute care, those letter writers will likely be very different. So you're going to want to make sure to take care of that. As somebody who helps with an academic rotation, I'm really a number 4, number 5 letter writer, because most of these sites are going to want clinical. But you do want to have somebody like me on there if you're seeing, they're going to have a significant teaching certificate or something like that. Then maybe somebody who led you through an academic medical or an academic rotation would make sense. Separate app requirements. So again, these are the letter of intent requirements. I know there's a place in Louisiana that requires very significant letter of intent supplemental. It's not a supplemental paragraph, but a supplemental question that they want you to answer. And so what's any supplemental applications you need, and then licensing requirements per the state, are you even eligible? This may also really impact those that are coming from Canada. You really want to check with the RPD and see, have people done it before? Have they come from that country, and so forth, especially international students as well. And then the to-dos. So what's the program? Did you do the letter of intent? Did you do the supplemental? Did you do the final edit? All materials converted to PDF. All materials uploaded to Forecast. References submitted. Application submitted. And I think this is a good sheet. It gives you a place to start. But what it didn't answer was, well, how do I know if I'm going to a site that's going to welcome me? And then how do I know if where I'm coming from, the school I'm coming from, is a reasonable place to come from? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another cheat sheet that I've put up that can help you with those answers. Okay, so the website to get these cheat sheets in the first place is pharmacyresidencypodcast.com/match rates. And I just written this book, Pharmacy School Rankings for Residency, because I was using all of this information, but students kept asking me, say, well, can I just get the book? And I was like, well, I didn't write a book. I just have all of this sorted out. So I was like, okay, well, let me put it in a reasonable way to use it. And the reason I put it on a Kindle, and you don't have to have a Kindle to read it, you just use the Kindle Cloud Reader, you'll see in a second. So let me show you. It's this top one, Rotations and Resident Match. Match your APPEs and rotations in colleges. Interview, match persistence, NAPLEX, and MPGEs to potential residencies. So let's break that down. Let's start with the APPEs and rotations. That's the first thing. You're going to need to look at your APPEs and rotations to look at their rotations. And then you're going to look at your College of Pharmacy's interview rate, your match rate, your persistence rate, your NAPLEX rate, and your MPJE rate. Maybe even CPJE, which is all in the book. But I want to show you why those are going to be valuable. So let me pop up this cheat sheet first. This is the first tab. It's the rotations match. And what you want to do is take your APPEs, all 9 of them, and I just put a fictional student here that's done internal med, infectious disease, peds, hospital, community, NICU, ambulatory care, and academic, and has hospital work experience. And I've taken the required rotations from a residency that are adult internal medicine, adult critical care, ID, pediatrics, practice management, cardiology, and then for electives, cardiology, adult hematology and oncology, peds critical care, NICU, PICU, peds hemonc, the EM or ED, ambulatory care, solid organ, heart, lung, abdominal, and then practice management, some pharmacy informatics, drug policy, medication safety, APPEs, so the teaching, you'll be teaching APPE students, the VCU Skills Lab, the certificate program, and frontline clinical on-call in the ED. And, this takes a little bit of work to do this, and I'll show you the site of the residency in a second, but I just want to kind of show you that your internal med APPE matches to their adult internal medicine, your infectious disease matches their infectious disease, your peds matches their peds. Your general hospital may have had some practice management components to it. Your NICU rotation matches their neonatal ICU elective. Your AmCare matches their AmCare elective. Your academic rotation fits in with their teaching certificate. Your hospital work experience works with the staffing that they'll do. Although you didn't do the ED rotation, you have some clinical that can help you with that, with critical care, but the ED obviously would be some bit of a disconnect that you would want to address. And so let me show you what this looks like on their website. Okay, so here we are, and we see that there's an orientation, and that's really not part of it. But this is one of the best websites I've seen from inova.org, and we did an interview a while back with the RPD and some of the residents. But you can see here the required, here the elective, makes it very easy to see exactly what you're going to be doing. And then the schedule's in some ways determined by the resident, and you can kind of go through these and see, okay, well, how well do I match to them? There's going to be some pharmacy practice experience in terms of your staffing. So every third weekend is huge. And then some practice management specifics that you may want to address. The projects that you'll do, and then teaching opportunities. This is going to be big. I'll talk a little bit later about this, but many sites are not paying for ASHP mid-year. They're giving you a fund to go travel, but they're not necessarily doing it for mid-year. And so it's quite expensive, though I still don't understand how it's like $340 for students and then like $410 or something like that for residents who are making a bunch more than students would. And then your ability to get a license in Virginia. So, that tells you, do my APPEs match? Okay, and so that's kind of the first. And by starting to do this with the sites that you're thinking about, you start to really see, well, does my experience work? And it really is a job that you're applying for. It's not a school that you're applying for. So the things that you've done and will do, by the time you get to the application, you'll have done maybe 5 APPEs, and then by the time you're in interview, maybe 6, maybe 7. But really, you're applying for a job, and they want somebody who's experienced in many of these areas. Now, you don't have adult critical care. They understand there's going to be some gaps, and they understand that some of your electives that you're going to want to get, maybe PICU, you don't have experience there, pediatric hemonc, you don't have experience there. That's okay. That's going to be the exploratory part. That's going to be the part that you build on. But really, a lot of your requireds should match up here. Let me show you another place where this is pretty relevant. This is the University of, or Penn Medicine, which is a very highly regarded hospital in Philly. And let's look at the required learning experience. So you've got the orientation, just as with Inova, internal med, critical care, anti-coag, antimicrobial stewardship, pharmacy administration, pharmaceutical care. But when we see that, we see internal med, which you had to have an APPE with, but critical care and antimicrobial stewardship, those are relatively specific. And then also having anti-coag and pharmacy administration, those are also pretty specific as well. So when you're looking at these required learning experiences, do you have significant experience in those areas? Critical care is extremely tough when you're in an API. It's certainly tough in residency, so there will be an expectation that you'll have that level of experience. And so we would do the same thing. You'd put it into the Excel file and kind of move from there. Okay, so those are rotations and how you would do that. But now what we want to do is we want to look at the people, because you're applying to a job. Yes, I understand that you're going to apply to a big hospital, small hospital, medium hospital, community hospital, academic medical center, and those things. But what you really want to see is, well, how do I kind of fare where I went to school and the schools that the residents are at from where I'm going. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate what's on the website at the residency site into numbers that are reasonable, and you'll be able to kind of come up with something for yourself that's going to tell you, hey, where do I fit? Okay, so let's go take a look at the website real quick, and then we'll come back to the numbers. I'm not sure if these residents that I know of are this year's residents or last year's residents, but it really doesn't matter, and I'll show you why. But we're only really focused right now on the university that they went to and the practice area interests. So this first resident, Michigan, internal medicine cardiology, South Carolina, pediatrics, Colorado, critical care, oncology, infectious disease practice management, and then San Francisco, oncology. Okay, so if we go back, we can also get this information, and we can see where they went. Okay, so South Carolina, VCU, Kentucky, and Ohio Northern. Okay, and we could do the exact same thing that we're going to do if you want to go, that deep. You don't need to, but let me show you what you can get out of this and how to translate that information into numbers. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to use the Residency Match book to produce numbers that are going to be very helpful when it comes to figuring out where you fit in. So what I did was I went to Maryland, and so let's pretend that I'm graduating from Maryland, and last year they had an interview rate that I would put as a 5. So what I've done is I've grouped all of the colleges of pharmacy across the country, 1 to 148, into groups of 15. It's really because that's what fit into a 6x9 book when I put it in a print edition. But what it does is it gives you a number from 1 to 10. And so my interview rate is the rate at which students at my college move from registered for the match to active with the list. So you wouldn't be active with the list if you didn't get an interview. Okay? Now, there's a caveat. Just because you got an interview doesn't mean you actually ranked anybody. Okay, so I'm just letting you know. But the interview rate, it matches as the 5th, or it's still in the top half of the country in terms of those that got an interview. The match rate is just how you did in the interview itself. Did you move from getting an interview to getting a match? Okay, and Maryland is actually in the 3rd tier, so top 30%. Okay, and you could have put a percentage here, but I really didn't want to mess with that. I loved how clean it was to have these very small numbers. The persistence rate is the rate at which you not only interview but you match. So those that started in registration that made it all the way to the match. Okay, and so when the interview rate's a little bit lower, which is a 5, then it's going to be harder for someone to match because they didn't get the interview in the first place. So if I'm at Maryland though, and I'm a student at Maryland, what I want to make sure I do is work on my documents, because the better my letter of intent, the better my recommendations, the better my CV, the higher this interview rate goes. And you don't go anywhere if you don't get an interview. That's the long and short of it. So for Maryland, it's there. But what Maryland students are doing that are getting the interviews is that they're matching at a very high rate. Okay. Now I put this down here because there's going to be a lot of residency program directors that are going to get burnt this year. The match rate went up significantly, 10% between the year before and this year. That means that they're taking many more students that are much lower on their list. And there are many residents out there that are the 35th choice or 36th choice that they had. Where you're like, oh my gosh, I got my third choice or my fourth choice, which is rare. You actually usually get your first and second. On the residency side, they're getting choices that are in the teens or 20s or 30s. So when the RPD is like, oh, it's you, great, it's probably not something personal. It's just that they're not getting their first, second, or third choice. They're actually getting their choice that's in the dozens. And then the MPJE. To be fair, Maryland is one of the hardest states in the country to pass the MPJE. Even the students that went to Maryland and the other two schools in Maryland really struggle with it. Those that are coming from DC, coming from Virginia, it's just a really, really tough test. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But let's say that my interest was in pediatrics. I got 3 11-year-olds, so that's just where that came from. Now we're going to look at the residents that we had at Inova. And again, I don't know if they're this year's residents or last year's, but it doesn't really matter as much. And so we're going to look at their numbers. So Michigan ranks 2 in interview rate. And that means that it's in the top 30 schools or top 20% of all schools in the country. The match rate is top 15 or top 10% of all schools in the country. And the persistence rate is number 1, is in the top group, which is again the top 10% in the country. NAPLEX pass rate is in the top 10% of the country, and so is the MPJE. So as soon as you see that, you're like, whoo, boy, all right. That's going to be a really high quality school that one of the residents is from. So let's take a second to figure out, how did I get those numbers? The 5, the 3, the 4, the 4, the 6, the 2, the 1, and so forth. Okay. So we're going to go back to the book itself in Kindle Cloud Reader. And I'm going to open up the search bar, and I'm just going to put in the word Michigan. And so you're going to be able to go to all of the places where Michigan is in the book. And you're going to see, okay, so the interview rate is here. And you could use the ranking. It's actually 27th in the country of all the schools in the country. It has a 91.07% interview rate. That means that Michigan students match at or get an interview over 91% of the time. Okay, that's a really nice thing to know, is that 9 out of 10 times a Michigan student is going to get the interview, okay, or at least an interview. Okay. Now the next thing is the match itself. Michigan students who got an interview 9 out of 10 times, they're going to match. Okay, so that also is very warm and fuzzy. If I'm going to Michigan, I'm feeling very good about that. Now, I'm an Iowan, and although I went to Iowa State, it's very tough for me to cheer for the, go blue and so forth. But I got to tell you, that is very good match rate. Okay, and then the persistence rate means that from that group in the very beginning that you wanted an interview, that wanted to match, what percent actually got to the finish line? And 82%, which is 12th highest in the nation, is very good. So when you hear people saying, well, the match rate really isn't the rate at which people match, this is what they're talking about, is the persistence rate. Did they get through the interview? Did they get to the match? And I think one of the most telling things is that this is a 3-year school that's pretty new, Medical College of Wisconsin. It's 15th in the nation. And then this group with some very, very prestigious company. So it drives me crazy, the U.S. News and World Report, how it's not even on there, how far away it is when you talk about matching and rankings and residency, how there are just some very clear areas of improvement or opportunity. Okay, and then you go to the next tab and you see, okay, where is Michigan with the NABPLEX score, and you see that they are 97% pass rate with a NABPLEX. So the RPD can feel warm and fuzzy. That even on a 20-sided die, they would need to score like a 20 to get the one person or two people that don't pass the NABPLEX for Michigan. And then the MPJE. So even though Michigan students are going across the country for residency, they pass the law at a very high rate. So I would feel warm and fuzzy as an RPD knowing that I have a Michigan student coming in to my residency. And so I'm not going to do this whole thing for all of the schools. I'm going to show you what I'm going to show you the numbers that popped up when we do this. All right, so here are the numbers where you have South Carolina, 7 interview rates. So something's happening here where the recommendations and the LOIs and the letters of, and then the CV is not coming together. So if they could increase the number of students that are getting the interview in the first place, they actually match pretty well, still top half of the country, 5 out of 10. Okay, persistence rate is a 5 out of 10, so many of them match as well. NABPLEX pass rate ranks a bit lower than we would like, and then MPJE is actually 4, which is a little bit higher. Now, I'm not doing this to disparage South Carolina. What I'm doing this for is to show you what the kind of range is. So you don't see, and match rate's probably the most important of these, but you really don't see anything lower than a 5 when you're looking at these match rates. So if I'm coming from Maryland, which is a 534, and I see a 755, what I've done is I've created a range where Michigan is here at the top, and then South Carolina is the lowest that they would probably take. And I'm still have to be in the top half of the country. What does that mean for you? Well, that might mean that if your college is bottom half of the country with match rate and persistence rate, 6 through 10, that's about 75 schools of pharmacy. You may not have a chance at this. Now, if you are the very top student or one of the very top students at that school, maybe you do. But what I'm doing is I'm giving you a general guideline that this is a top residency, that they did take somebody from Michigan and UCSF, which are extremely top boxes, 1s and 2s for interview rate, match rate, and persistence rate, and NABPLEX pass rate. But they also took someone from South Carolina and Colorado, which are top half of the country. But what they didn't do was take anyone from the bottom half of the country. And that should be very telling if your school is in the bottom half. And I don't, again, mean to disparage anybody or any schools that are in that bottom half, but it is what it is. The school has traditionally not matched at a high rate, and because of that, the chances of you getting this residency are going to be a bit lower. And so all I'm saying is, I'm not saying don't apply to this residency. I'm just saying recognize that someplace like Inova might be a more difficult place for you to get if you are in the bottom half. Now, if you are, 6 with match rate and 6 with persistence rate and 6 with interview rate, maybe you're a little bit closer, have a better chance. But as you go down, it's going to be a little bit tougher. Okay. The other things you really want to notice about this is that Michigan, South Carolina, Colorado, and UCSF, that is a very national group. There is not a single person in here from Virginia. And if you looked at last year's, there was someone from VCU, but you also noticed that DC and Maryland, which are adjoining states, are also not in here as well. And so what this residency tells me is that they are not as focused on making sure that they get people from around the region, but that they get the very best from across the country. So as a Maryland student, I would feel very comfortable applying here because not only am I in region, but that this is a place that welcomes the best from across the country. And then I would also, when I'm thinking about if this student from South Carolina, and I'm not going to put their names in here for this exercise, but if I would be looking for this particular resident from South Carolina, and I would say, okay, well, I'm interested in PEDS too. Can you tell me what you've been doing with peds? Were you able to get your electives early? Were you able to get your electives at all? And those things. And this would be the person that I would want to connect with. And while there's all of these residents and you kind of get the first person in line, I would say, hey, I'm okay to wait. Would I be able to speak to this person? Or maybe I could come back a little bit later when it's less busy. Would it be okay if I talk to you a little bit later? I'm interested in pediatrics. I saw on the website that you're interested in pediatrics. I'd really be interested in that site. Okay. All right, well, let's look at some other sites. And what I'm going to do is going to look like magic, where I pop them up here and it just comes up. But hold on just a sec. All right, there's the internet magic. And if you can't see this because you're listening, I put up Inova, UNC Acute Care, Princeton Baptist, Huntsville Hospital, and the Orlando VA. I talked about a number of these in a past episode, but what I want to do now is do the same thing for these. And I'm not going to put in all of the rates. You can do that. But what I want to do is make clear how much you can learn just by seeing the colleges these students came from. So when you look at UNC Acute Care, I think there were 2 residents that didn't have a profile and 6 that did. But Missouri, Kansas City is in here twice. North Carolina, Florida, Ohio State, and Florida. I can already tell you that there are going to be very high match rates and interview rates and persistence rates with these. And I'm not going to put the numbers up right now. You can do it from the book. But also what you want to look at is a couple of things. The first thing you notice with UNC Acute Care is that you say, well, UNC's got a high match rate because they take their own. Not true. Not true. Only 1 North Carolina student here. Maybe the 2 that didn't have a profiler from North Carolina, but this is not, North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina. This is quite different. It's reasonable that people are going to be coming from east of the Mississippi, that they're going to be, in this half of the country. But it would be kind of interesting to see, like, really? 2 from Missouri, KC, 150 schools in this country, and you get 2 from the same school? And then you see 2 from Florida as well. And you're like, okay, well, what happened there? And maybe it was that a couple of these students ended up doing a UNC rotation. Or maybe there's something, maybe they're married. I don't know. I didn't really take time to look at the people, but it's just interesting that you see people from the same school when it's 150, 1 out of 150 chance. And then you start thinking, well, maybe it isn't a 1 out of 150 chance. And if you get to that point, you are in good shape. So Missouri, KC, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio State, Florida, you see very good schools. And you can then quantify that by going to the book and doing this with each of the schools. But then let's go to Princeton Baptist, and we see that it becomes even more focused. 2 from Auburn, which is in Alabama, where Princeton Baptist is, and then 1 from Lipscomb, which is in Tennessee, but still in the deep South, Southeastern Conference, if you were thinking sports and things like that. Lipscomb, obviously, not in the SEC, but recognize that the Auburn students probably have the better chance. And maybe a Samford student might have a same chance as Auburn. I'm not sure what the relationship is with Princeton Baptist. But Lipscomb, it's reasonable that someone from Tennessee would have been able to come down to Alabama and have a rotation with them. Or maybe it worked out to be one of the best students at Lipscomb that got it. But when you look at the numbers again, these numbers are going to be really good when it comes to match rate and so forth. So it's going to be very competitive residency. Huntsville Hospital, I talked about them before. Half of them are from Auburn. 1's from Samford. So 4 are from in-state. Pennsylvania, across the Mason-Dixon on the north, and then Mississippi back in the SEC. So you see that very southern. The question is, are the applicants from the South in general, and there probably would be, or is it that they have a preference for them? And we can't answer that question. Only the RPD would be able to answer that question. But what you're going to see, and what I want you to take away from this, is that if you look at Inova, Michigan, South Carolina, Colorado, and California, is a very different demographic than Auburn, Samford, all in the same state, Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi. Shenandoah, Virginia, Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. Not sure. Let's check that. Yep, sure is Virginia. So it is not north of the Mason-Dixon. It is so Virginia. That makes a lot more sense to me. So Shenandoah is in Winchester, Virginia. So again, very southern schools, Auburn, Sanford, Mississippi, and Shenandoah. And so we see that there's just a group of applicants that they're probably getting from the proximity. And then I mentioned the Orlando VA. Even this Mercer person had a tie to Florida. I think they went to undergrad at Florida, then went to Mercer, then came back. And Georgia is right next to Florida. Physically, Gainesville's in the north half of the state. It's not in the panhandle, but it is, in the northern part of it, just north of Ocala. So you see Mercer, Florida, 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 Florida. And that should tell you a ton. Yeah, you could put the interview rate, match rate, and all that stuff, but you can see there is a clear preference for students that already know the EHR, have already done certain API activities with them, and that is kind of the antithesis of INOVA, which is going across the country, getting students to Orlando, where, look, we just want students that have been here before, that know us, and that are going to stay with us, because we really want to keep these people on. And then if you go back to INOVA, you saw that one of the students from last year or the year before stayed on as a staff pharmacist and was hired by them. One of the best questions you can ask when you're in that kind of showcase is, where did the residents end up? And if you can't find it on the website, that is an amazingly valuable piece of information. Okay. All right. So again, this is what you want to do before you go to ASHP mid-year is, and you can get this cheat sheet at pharmacyresidencypodcast.com, and start doing this. And what's going to happen is you're going to figure out, one, where does your college begin? That's the very first thing you want to do, is put your college up here and figure out, like, what is the interview rate? Does my college do a really good job of getting interviews? And what is the match rate? What is the persistence rate and NAPLEX pass rate? And let's just take a look at some of the colleges that do the best, and you'll be really surprised at how different they are. All right, so the schools that had the highest interview rate, which is the rate at which you got from registered to active with list. Some of these are very new. American University of Health Sciences, I think they just graduated their first class. They're in Signal Hill, California. Hassan University, Cedarville, Puerto Rico, UCSF, Thomas Jefferson, Findlay, Wayne State, UNC, Iowa, Rhode Island, Neomed, Drake, Binghamton, and Connecticut. Okay, so those are the ones that you have the highest chance, or did last year, of getting from that part of applying and getting to the interview itself. And what these schools have done a great job of is that resume, or not resume, but CV, letter of intent, and the recommendations. But I'm just, tickled pink here that Iowa and Drake are both on here, because I do help a lot of students in my home state with their materials. So am I moving the needle? Hopefully. I mean, I would love to think that I'm part of that. So let's go on to the match rate. MCPHS has a Manchester group of 4 students that all matched, that got the interview. But Findlay, UNC, Toledo, Thomas Jefferson, Pitt, Medical College of Wisconsin, Rhode Island, Nebraska, Purdue, Wisconsin, Connecticut, West Virginia, Michigan, and Mississippi. While some of these are very high on the U.S. News list, the private schools really get short shrift. So Findlay, MCPHS, and Thomas Jefferson, Medical College of Wisconsin, those are not very high on U.S. News, if they're even on there at all. Both MCPHS Manchester and Wisconsin, or Medical College of Wisconsin, are not. So you wouldn't know at all that these are some of the best matching schools in the country. So kudos to them. To be fair, they are much smaller cohorts. Talking about 20 people. With MCPHS, it was like 4, this satellite campus. So very few people, but they're obviously getting quite a bit of attention from their professors and so forth. And then the last one here, the persistence rate, that's the one where you're really going to see that kind of top group that really gets all of those people from that application. And then, it's Findlay, Thomas Jefferson, 2 privates are at the very top. UNC, Puerto Rico, Rhode Island, UCSF, Wisconsin, Connecticut, Wayne State, Purdue, Mississippi, Michigan, Neomed, Pitt, and Medical College of Wisconsin. To me, these 15 schools are truly the top 15 when you look at overall people that wanted a residency in the first place and got to it at the end. Yeah, a bunch of them could have gotten jobs and knocked themselves out, and that takes somebody lower. But to me, the persistence rate is the biggest rate. So again, the book has all of the schools, all 150, allows you to kind of figure out where you're at. And let me show you what the actual book looks like. It's Pharmacy School Rankings for Residency, Solving the Application Puzzle for Future Pharmacists. And yeah, number 1 release in pharmacy. But what I just wanted to show you is that what you can do, if you are willing to do this analysis and these analytics, is get a tremendous competitive advantage over the other people. That when you're going to talk to these residents that are at mid-year, you already know that the APPEs you've done are going to match what they're doing. And what you can do is you can say, hey, I looked at your website. I saw that I've already had these APPEs. Which of the APPEs was most valuable for you to take as you were getting into residency? Or even better, could you tell me some of the more clinical APPEs that you did that you feel best prepared you for residency? Okay. And then when you're coming into a residency booth, you know that if you're coming from Michigan, you are, one of the top schools in the country, and that you are going to fit in with most every residency. But if you're in a position where maybe you're not in that top half, then you're going to want to really do some research and figure out, okay, well, where did students from my school go that they did match? Okay, let me go meet those residencies and kind of see, what they're doing. Because I will tell you, there is a bit of meritocracy to this, where it doesn't seem like it. For some, yeah, certainly they're going to be they've got kind of their schools that they want to pull from and the region they want to pull from. But to be fair, some of the residencies or the residency process and the match process will be taking the very best students from all of the schools. Only 1 school didn't match last year, and no school got less than 3 interviews last year. And 147 schools did match. It could be so much easier for residencies to just take from the very top schools, and they don't do that because they still want the very best person from other schools. Yeah, it's a longer shot, but they still want that very top person, and we'll get into the Malcolm Gladwell of it and why that is. Okay, so first step, really to go back to the book, figure out where your school is in the big 5 categories: the interview, the match, the match, the persistence rate, the NAPLEX, the MPJE, and CPJE. That's where you stand. Okay. Then it's time to start looking at the residency sites that you were thinking about and see, well, where do you really stand? And you might be very surprised. You might be, whoa, I do qualify. But do I have the APPEs? Because, if you're going to a Penn Medicine or a UNC or Inova, there's certain ones that they're going to expect that you have and that you're going to have a certain level of clinical knowledge. The other thing that you don't really see is the actual interviews. And in the actual interviews, somebody that has that clinical knowledge has a tremendous advantage, because they might ask you a question like, okay, what would you do about this hypokalemia? And you go, oh, well, we actually had a case just like that, and this is what we did, and these are the people we talked to. Or there was some dissension. The physician wanted to do this, and the clinical pharmacist wanted to do this, and then this is how we did it. All they want to see is that you've got a great answer from some experience that you've had, or that you could come up with a great answer. So need my help, TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com. PharmacyResidencyPodcast.com is where you can find all this information. And then want to work one-on-one with me, it's residency.teachable.com. And again, as you kind of build these things, I can better talk to you, a informed customer. What was the thing? It was SIMS. It was a clothing store, and they had this great saying that an educated customer is our best customer, and an educated applicant is someone that I can work with a lot easier than someone that doesn't know where they stand with their school and the schools that the residents are at the sites that they're applying to. So the more you go into the numbers, the more you do this analytics and this approach, the easier it is for me to help you make the hard decisions and figure out, like, there's 4,000 residency positions. Where do I apply? And it becomes very clear where you're going to have a good chance, a great chance, and maybe it's going to be a long shot for you. So, all right, hope this was all helpful.